Good morning, everyone. Nearly said good afternoon, better make sure, right? So good morning, all. Thanks for joining in on today's webinar. The purpose of today's webinar, from my point of view, is about talking about MaiaGrazing as a tool and where it fits into professional management. If you came onto this webinar looking for some information with regards to how to use the specific program, we might be able to cover some of that later. I wanted to more focus on where this actually fits into whole of business management, because I think that's more important than anything. If we don't know where the tools at our fingertips fit into the business, it's easy to forget about why we do them. So let's have a look. A few things we're going to go through. I'm going to talk about professional management first and foremost. Then we're going to talk about using MaiaGrazing. And I'm going to be looking at it from the point of view of entering your data in the present, so now, to create meaningful information about the past, and specifically referring to stock flows and grazing charts, and then using MaiaGrazing to plan for the future. Now, and then finish off with some questions and answers. And again, if you've got specific questions, Nick Walker and the Maia team are not too far away. They're only a phone call or an email away. With regards to getting some other questions. If you've got specific things specific to your program, if you're using it now, you can cover those, or we might be able to cover them at the end. And Nick and those fellas know the program backwards. Now, most of you will have seen this model here before. And we're talking about professional management here, and that's the goal for all of us. And the outcome that we're looking for from professional management is business improvement. So improvements in our business performance, business growth, and also life improvement in the lives we get to live. And then down the bottom here, we've got our production systems. This is the bit that keeps us busy outside. And it's important that we know how we link from our production systems to professional management to create business and life improvement. And the first step we need to do is take the data that we get given and that we generate and that we record from our production systems and convert that into meaningful information. And when we're doing that, we're getting that from our physical or our land data, livestock and crop data, as well as our financial data. There's a few different aspects of the business there, but just having numbers and reams of information doesn't help us. We need to convert that data into meaningful information as a first and foremost point. And we'll come back to that because that's where I see that Maia does fit in, is converting data to meaningful information. Once we've got that meaningful information, let's remind ourselves what we're going to do with it once we've got it. If we know where we're heading, now I'm going to assume that you have clear goals and direction. Those of you doing anything with us at the moment and next steps or executive link or consulting, I hope that's a pretty important part of what's being done, so you know where you're actually heading, what's important, where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what the outcomes you're trying to achieve are, that might be the first thing to go and spend a bit more time on and keep chipping away at getting clear goals and clear direction. Once you know where you're heading and you've got some meaningful information about where you are and the data side of things, that's where we can make decisions. Now, Maia is purely a decision-making support tool. Like any spreadsheet, record-keeping system, anything that's around you, the whole purpose of having any of these things is for making decisions. And I don't want anybody to ever think as though they've got something just so we've got data. And it's a waste of time. Most of you are pretty time poor. You've got a hell of a lot on your plate. So it's important to make sure that what you are doing, everything you're spending time on, is supporting your ability to make better management decisions. And to make decisions, we need to know where our heart wants to go, and we need some meaningful information, which is the head, so the balancing of our head and our heart to make good decisions. And we call that the professional management model. And those of you who've done schools, etc., you've had a lot of knowledge thrown at you about how to do that. That's the easy part. It's making the change and incorporating that back into your business. Most of you will know that's the hard part at the back end of it there. So it's about making that change. And when we made the change, when we've actually incorporated this model into skills, I think about that adult learning model where we go from unconscious incompetence to conscious competence. This is where we want to get. We want to get you making decisions without having to think about it. That's the outcome behind it. The two areas that I see Maia really fitting in at are down here. It's about giving us good land data on one aspect there. It does our grazing charts for us, so it tells us what our paddock yields are. And it also gives us a lot of data here at this level with regards to our livestock information. Now, it doesn't, those of you mixed farming operations, doesn't record a lot from cropping information, but it does record that livestock. Now, those two pillars there, the land information about how well is our land performing, and our livestock data, are areas that I see a lot of people spending a lot of time trying to work out. So they're not small parts of the business. They're actually really big parts that take a lot of time and cause a lot of frustration for people when they don't have this bit easy to pull together, easy to summarize, and easy to use, most importantly, to make decisions. So we're going to talk about these two this morning. And I want to talk about them in the context of the RCS Grazing Principles, Regenerative Grazing Principles. And the outcome from any of these decisions from a grazing perspective is that we want to profitably leave our country in better condition. So the grazing principles, most of you have seen them. If these aren't in the right order, it might be time for a refresh. First one is that we want to have a plan, monitor against our plan, and manage according to any changes that we see. So plan, monitor, and manage our grazing systems, the first and most important grazing principle. The second one is control of time is adjusted to suit the growth rate of the plant. And that's about aiming for a phase 2 plan as much as we can and giving our plants adequate rest to suit the rate of growth. The third one is matching stocking rate to carrying capacity. So matching the number of mouths that we're putting on our country to the amount of feed that we've got available to use. And then we get into managing livestock effectively. That's about animal performance, using stock density for minimum time as a tool, and then diversity of plants and animals for optimal ecosystem services. So they're the principles. The first three here, plan, monitor and manage, rest periods and stocking rate to carrying capacity, are all about managing the ecosystem. The fourth one is about generating maximum animal performance. And when we've got maximum animal performance, that's the bit we get paid for. And then these bottom two are about both. It's about the ecosystem and about the money side of the business. And MaiaGrazing and any of these grazing system tools that we're using or business decision support tools fit into this first principle here about plan, monitor and manage. Now, if you haven't done a score for a while, you'll notice that we've changed the order. This used to be down the order. We've brought that up to the top because this is the people in any system. The people are the most important part of any business, any grazing operation, any type of business that you're working with. And it's about how well are we at looking where we're going, looking how we're going, and making changes as we go. And when it comes to implementing these principles, I want you to just keep that in mind, the importance of this principle in terms of the tools that you've got available. And is it quick? Is it easy? When we get the principles wrong, and we've got, and this is one of the things that we see, I spent a fair bit of time out on the road in the last couple of months, and there's a lot of country where you've got a few animals starting to put their head under the fence to get some green grass or to get some grass that they actually don't have. Making a mistake may and quite often does have some pretty serious consequences for us. So we want to make sure that we're actually being professional managers around implementing these principles and not getting caught in a precarious situation such as this one here. Moving on to the program and about how we use it. An important starting point with Maia as a tool is to record things now as they are. So recording things as is right now. And I'm just going to talk about, and thank you to Andrew and Megan Laurie for letting me use some of their data here. So this is one fresh off the shelf, pulled out of some screenshots out of their program this morning. This is the livestock inventory. There's a couple of different parts to MaiaGrazing. One of them is about recording what your sheep and cattle numbers are, or what your livestock numbers are. You can see here they've got a few camels that they include in here as well. So the first part is about recording the livestock inventory. What have you got? Where are they? And you can see here the total number of head. They're working in LSU. Anybody down further south? I'm going to talk about LSU because most of the people on today's webinar are from further north. But if you're down south, just sub out LSU for DSE. So you can get that summary there about what's on the property now. And you can see the different mobs. They've got 4 mobs of animals at the moment, how many head in each one and how many LSU, what current rotation or cell or grazing area they're in, and then specifically what paddock are they in at this point in time. how long have they been in that paddock, how many SDHs, what's the current yield out of that paddock. There's quite a lot of information, a nice little snapshot there. And we can, by using these buttons over here, if we wanted to move a mob into a different paddock, merge two mobs together, split a mob into two different, so let's say you split steers and heifers out of weaners. If you sell some or you want to enter some births, you just press some buttons there within that mob. And then up here, if you purchase any, you hit on that and you enter the details about the animals that you've purchased. So all the key things that you'd be looking to use are recorded at this page here, the livestock inventory. And from a consulting point of view, it's great for me to be able to come in and click on this for the likes of Andrew and Megan and know what have they actually got on their place at the moment. It's real-time data. There's no updating records or updating spreadsheets. It's there, it's real-time, and I can get a real feel for what's happening, what type of animals they're running. It's like a paddock book. I mean, we've all grown up, I'm sure, with paddock books about recording how many animals we've got in each paddock. This is like a paddock book on steroids, and it takes it to a lot further level. And I just want to look at this heifers line here, this heifers mob, sorry. So there's mob here, and this is a name that you could call these nice eyes, or you can call them dinosaurs. You can call this whatever name you want, whatever, and you refer to it to whatever name you'd have in the paddock. So Andrew's called this mob the heifer mob. And this button over here, you can click down this and you can either expand all or collapse all, which gives you some more detail. And I'm just going to use the heifer mob as an example. So if we clicked on that, this other little screen pops up below it there. And you can see that that 633 head in the heifers is actually made up of 204 weaner steers at this point in time. And they're 260 kilos, currently rated at 0.94, which equals 192 LSU. And there's 429 weaner heifers that are a bit heavier. They're 314 kilos, and therefore their LSU rating is going to be a little bit higher as well. And that equals 477. So this 633 and 669 LSU, you can see here now what actually makes that up. Now this can have any number. You could have 10 different animal classes in this particular mob. So you can have as much detail in there as you need or as little as you need to get that accuracy up at a mob level. And all of this, when you first set up the program, it's important to know what animal classes you're dealing with. For example, having breeders, maiden heifers, H1s, weaner heifers, calves, weaner steers, bullocks, etc. And then every animal class that you have in your livestock inventory falls back into that. So you've got a lot of detail, but it's all able to be pulled together to have a nice whole of property piece of information. So if we were to collapse that back up now and just look at this heifer, if we were to click, see anything that's got blue, you can click on it here and there's more information in the background. So if we were to click on the heifer button there, we get in a situation where you can look at mob information, event history, graze history, mob flow. The mob information is the same information we just saw. You can see the two different classes that are in there, how many head, weight, and the LSU ratings. Now, let's say you wanted to change the weights on these animals. You could come in here and there's a little up and down arrow that appears when you hover over this button. So let's say that Andrew felt that the steers were actually a bit heavier. They might have been 275 kilos now. We can come in and change this number here to 275. And then that updates all your livestock records as of that point in time, as of today's date, or you can change that date if you wanted back to maybe a previous event. So you can update your mob information from there. You can also do it if you've got a graze plan and you're recording moving animals from one paddock to another. You can update your weights on the fly as well there. Again, the how to use, Nick can run through that with you in a lot of detail. The graze history is another tab that you've got here. This is two buttons to get to this information, and you can see what paddocks they've been in previously, how big they were, when they went in there, how long they're in there for, the LSU and number head. You can see it hasn't changed for the number of grazers. What the yield was out of that paddock, so how many stock days per hectare in Andrew and Megan's case they pull out of each of those paddocks. So you can see there's a couple of paddocks here they pulled 70 out of 70, 80, and then this one here only had 17. And that might be because that country was flooded earlier in the year. And so if you saw that sort of data, be go, okay, what's the difference? What's the reason behind that? What was the graze intensity? and then what was the rest period beforehand. So if we come back to the principles, there's some couple of the key things here. Here's our recovery period, rest period. What are we given? What's the time frame we've given between grazes? So we can see the actual number of days there. So this one here, river had a long time. Without knowing exactly, I'd guess that was country that did get flooded there in April, I think it was, when the Mackenzie came up. So that's why that's what probably had a long rest and not a lot of feed taken out of it. The rest of them are sitting in around about that 100 to 120 days. And for this time of year, that's about what you'd expect with the year that we've had. There's our grazing principle number 2. Grazing principle number 3 is how much feed have we pulled out and what intensity. So we can see here now, I can just come into this business and have a look at this and say, well, right, that's what's been pulled out. Medium grazers for this time of year is a medium grazer we want to be pulling out. Yeah, I'm comfortable seeing that. We wouldn't want to see too many heavy grazers earlier to now. From now on, I would expect that we're going to start seeing some heavy ones coming through. But for that particular mob of heifers now, we can see all the history, and I've only just taken a bit of a snapshot there for them. So that's the graze history. For mob flow, we can click on that as well, and we can see, well, what's the history behind this mob? And we could go right back to January last year, and this is where it started off. And it was split from a different herd, and you can see that there was 77 weaner heifers brought in, another 78 weaner heifers brought in, and if this was your business, that would all make sense to you, what's on that page, and you can see how do we actually arrive, and I didn't scroll down to today's date there, but you can see what's the mob flow and how we've arrived at that 633 head that we've currently got in the paddock. And you can go and look at each of these events and click on these to go back to the actual event that happened. So it's pretty easy to, on that page there, to get a good feel about the mob, what's in there now, where have they been, and where have they come from. And you can do that for each of these mobs. Like I said, we just picked on this heifer mob there as an example. And you can do that for all of them. So the livestock recording side of things is pretty powerful, and it's real time, it's live, any changes you make are updated. That then collapses back up to a whole of property dashboard. And you can customize your dashboard. This is the layout that I like to have, where I can see how many number of head in LSU there are at the moment, the number of mobs involved, and what the current stocking rate is in SDH per 100 mils, what the current rolling rainfall is, and what the carrying capacity is in SDH per 100. So I like that little snapshot. On your dashboard, just below that, you've actually got this information there. A summary of that information sits there as well. So we can see that we've got a lot of information's pulled together. So we've got the detail for what you've got in each paddock. But if we're recording what you've got in each paddock and keeping these information up to date, this is that paddock book we were talking about. If you're keeping your paddock book up to date, what Maya does really well is it records how we got from your paddock book at the 1st of July to the paddock book today at the 8th of September. And that's the area that we usually see people struggle with, is it's really easy to know what you've got out in the paddock now, but where we really struggle typically at actually having a good record to know how we got from the previous set of numbers to the current numbers. And by recording an event for every change here, we've got that information. And it becomes really easy then to generate a stock flow. And you can see here for our analytics, we can go and get a stock flow, and you can pull up a stock flow for an enterprise or from a stock class for whatever date period you want. And that information is then what we start to pull together for doing our business analysis. So in doing business analysis, there's a few different stages that are important. We just talked about how the information that you record within Maya gives us the information we need to do a stock flow. It gives us confidence in what our opening inventory is, as if we keep our stock numbers as at any point in time. Got a good record of what's come into the place, our purchases, what was born, transfers between, or internal purchases between enterprises, what went out, what we sold, what died, what was lost, and then what was an internal sale to another enterprise or transfer. And then that gives us our closing inventory. So if we know what we started with and we know what came in and what went out, that gives us our closing inventory. We can then do a trading account, because all that information that we get from our stock flow is what we need to do a trading account. Our gross income as our sales comes from there, plus our closing inventory, plus our internal sales, less our cost of sales, which is our purchases, opening inventory, and internal purchases equals our gross product. Now, if we've got our chart of accounts set up correctly, we can then do our gross margin quite quickly and easily, because we've only got to press a button to get our gross product out of mind. Our stock flow is done for us. Our gross margin analysis is our gross product, again, which comes from our trading account, and all the information for our trading account comes from our stock flow. So our gross margin is our gross product less our direct cost. And this is where, if we've got our chart of accounts set up correctly, we should be able to press a button within our accounting program and get our direct costs for the same period of time as we did our stock flow. Gross product less direct costs equals gross margin. We then go on and do our profit and loss. So get all our total gross margins less our overhead costs gives us our EBIT, earnings before interest and tax. And then EBIT less finance costs equals business profit. Then we take out our tax and our capital expenditure, gives us our closing balance sheet. So to get from our starting balance sheet to our closing balance sheet, that's what we need to do. Stock flow, crop flow, trading account, gross margin, P&L, tax, capital expenditure, gives us our closing. From a KPI point of view, if we're going to look at some of our key ratios, if we wanted to look at some of the main drivers, now our return on assets, our really high level figure, is our earnings before interest and tax as percentage of our closing ag assets, which we get from our closing balance sheet over here. So if we want to know what our return on assets are, we need to know what our earnings before interest and tax are, which is gross margin less overheads. So we need to know what our overheads are and what our gross margin is. If we want to know what our gross margin is, we need to know what our direct costs are, and we need to know what our gross product was with confidence. To know what our gross product was with confidence, we need to be able to do a trading account, which means we need to know our gross income and cost of sales. All of this information which comes from our stock flow. So to get down to doing our return on assets, which is a really uniform high-level indicator of how we're performing, we must have confidence in our stock flow, which gives us our gross product. So that's just return on assets. Now, if we were to have a look now at our three secrets, so three secrets of profit. So let's go with our gross margin ratio first. Our gross margin ratio is our gross margin divided by gross product. So again, we need to know what our gross product is with confidence to do a gross margin ratio. Our overhead ratio is our overhead costs divided by gross product. Our turnover ratio is our gross product divided by our closing ag assets. Our finance ratio is our finance cost divided by, have a guess, gross product. So you can see how laying it out this way and thinking about our stock flow and the role that it plays. Our stock flow, the purpose of that, as well as knowing how many animals we've got and where, is to give us our gross product. Now, all these ratios I've been talking about have been the dollar side of things. That gives us our gross product, our gross margin, overheads, finance, and there's I just went through the top, what I consider to be the top 6 ratios. Return on assets, then the 3 secrets, finance ratio, and then finally expense ratio, which is just all of these added up, divided by gross product, a quick and dirty one. Each of those are really important, give us a really nice breakdown of how the business is performing overall at a return on assets, what's working for the business in terms of which of the 3 secrets, and which one's most limiting profit. But it's not just about money. Up here at a stock flow level, if we've got a good set of stock records, we're also recording animal weights, okay, our kgs performance. If we know how heavy our animals are, and when we're recording how many we've got, instead of just not only having the dollar side of things, if we've got the weight side of things, we can start to get our gross product kilos produced. And we can use that information then for kgs per hectare. We can use that to calculate our cost of production. You've heard me talk quite a lot about the importance of knowing and managing your cost of production. Well, being able to quickly and easily generate your cost of production comes from having a good stock flow. And so I know I'm sounding a bit like a broken record. However, the importance of good stock records and making it simple and easy in the business, and that's the key part behind it as well. Having good stock records, it's not just about knowing what you've got in the paddock. It's being able to work out your productivity, kgs per hectare. It's about knowing your cost of production. It's about being able to do your high-level KPIs. It all stems from this. So this is an area that you're struggling with. I really encourage you to look at different ways of getting confidence in your stock numbers quickly and easily. Because if it takes a long time, it just means that you're not in control of your business. And if you have to go and spend a lot of time getting this information together, then you are going to miss opportunities, or you're potentially going to be making too many decisions purely based on the heart without balancing it up with the head. And that's what this information does for us. So that's from the productivity and the use of the stock flow. I now want to talk about grazing charts. The other thing we can get, if we keep a record of how many animals we've got in each paddock, what their weights are, and if we know their weights and how they're performing, we can do their LSU ratings, and we record how many LSU we've got in each paddock for how long. We actually don't need any more information to start recording our grazing charts. There we go. I managed to get rid of that pointer. I've done well. With our grazing charts, now this is a traditional form of grazing chart. You can see here we've got our paddocks down the left-hand side, how big they are, our months across the top. And this is a made-up one because it's nice and pretty. And you can see that, get that nice visual up the top about how our country's being grazed, when it's being grazed, what our yields are from each paddock. And we've got our water use efficiency information in our livestock records. And this is, it's such a powerful tool to have this filled in. I believe the main reason a lot of people don't fill in grazing charts, and unfortunately the uptake has historically been quite low, is because they haven't had good livestock records, which takes us back to why I started talking about the livestock records, and I feel it is relatively easy to keep your livestock records in a really accurate way in a program such as this, and it cuts down a lot of dumble entry that we've had to deal with in previous times as well. With the grazing charts, and let's think about the importance of this. So I asked Terry about this last year, and he talked about, and he had the situation then, a client told him grazing chart was the most important tool he's had to manage his grazing business in the last 20 years, and I really agree. It's such a powerful tool, and you can't manage what you don't measure, and by that Terry's talking about planning and monitoring around that. If we've got a grazing chart, we can really plan and monitor and manage our business so much better. If we don't have that information, it's much harder to make any meaningful decisions because we don't have meaningful information, and that's the big one. Now, the value of it, we've had different clients talk about situations where it's a $15,000 tool, and there's other people who talked about it being a $150,000 tool. Had a couple recently who talked about it being a $450,000 tool, and that's gone two ways. One of them said they lost $450,000 because they stopped filling it in, and another client said he made $400,000 off the information that his grazing chart told him that he wouldn't have gotten elsewhere. So they're a powerful tool. So how do we get it? The first step is to fill it in and make it happen. As I said, if you have good livestock records, you're recording how many animals you've got, where they are, how many LSU they got, and when you move them, you don't need any more information. So this is the grazing chart off that same business we've been looking at from Moora Plains. So just by keeping your livestock information up to date, you get a nice picture about what's being grazed and when. And on the website, if you hover over any of these, it'll tell you what mob's there, how long they've been in there for, what yield they've taken out so far, and how many, so which mob, how many LSU, and what the yield's been. I think that's the main information. You get that by hovering over any one of these. Doesn't matter what grazing system you're using. Obviously, this is for a cell here, a series of paddocks that are rotated around. If you're doing a little bit of a less intense rotation, it's still really good information. There's some set stock paddocks on every place for different reasons. Once we've got this information, we can then get much more accurate at our feed budgeting. And I think that's a really key point, to be able to come back to somewhere like here and see how much feed we've just pulled out of this paddock, how much feed we've just pulled out of that paddock. We're getting budget to actual information on the go all the time. And that helps us to be able to look into the paddocks in front and recalibrate in our mind how much feed we've got in the next paddock. we can get much better then. If we can feed budget, we can get better at matching stocking rate to carrying capacity. And in my experience, the ability to match stocking rate to carrying capacity with confidence is probably one of the most powerful economic tools that you've got at your disposal. You've got an absolutely enormous edge over the competition and over other people in the industry if you can match stocking rate to carrying capacity. The position of power always lies with the person who's got grass. And so getting good at that and having grass when other people don't is where you'll really, really, really make some good windfalls in some businesses to help you get through those years where things are a bit tighter. And similarly, if you aren't good at that and you find yourself where your stocking rate is exceeding your carrying capacity, that's where you can lose a lot of money if you get caught with cows calving and running out of feed and things like that. So that's an enormous one. Being able to run projections and scenarios, and I'll talk about that in a little more in a second, the planning. The paddock yields, and I'll just go back to this page here. You can see here down the left-hand side, you can, at any point in time, you can see what your yield for the last 12 months has been out of that paddock. And you can click into each of these paddocks and you can really interrogate the history behind that grazing. When was it last grazed? How frequent? Which mob? What's the yields been each time? And you can copy and paste that information into a spreadsheet and graph it. You can do a lot of stuff with it yourself to make meaningful use of this information. If we just looked at this information here, see we've got some paddocks within this one rotation that are yielding 40 in the last 12 months. And some that are yielding 200 stock days per hectare in the last 12 months. So this paddock here is yielding 500% the amount of feed that paddock T10A is. Now, there may be a really valid reason behind that. And that's the first thing to go and look at. Okay, what's the reason behind it? Maybe that was a paddock that got flooded as well. Maybe it had a fire go through it. There might be different reasons. But even if we looked at paddock T10B, it yielded 92. That's 50%. So then we can ask the question, okay, did this one here have something done to it? Was there a different type of treatment that happened in paddock in this temp one? Is it because it's a bit smaller than what that one is? Is it that it had a different pasture species put into it, that it had a different treatment, it was grazed in a different way? You'll know what the history of that paddock is. And then that gets a situation where you know that if it's the same land type and you can take that paddock up to that, you can put a value on it. You can put a value on a stock day. If you take your gross margin per LSU out of your profit probe report and divide that by 365, that's the value of one stock day. What the gross margin per LSU, that's across 12 months, a full 12-month period. Divide that by 365 stock days, which is what one LSU would eat in a year, and that gives you the value of one stock day. So let's say for a lot of people over the last few years, that's been around about $1 per stock day. So if you could take T10B from that yield, even if we only brought it up to this 150 mark, that's worth $50 per hectare in additional grass. I think that's pretty good information to have. It allows you to make really good economic decision making. You also get a nice visual representation of how you're grazing your country. Again, you can see how long is it between grazes that we're using. You don't need a lot of time. For those of you who are visual, it's nice to see what's going on. And you know how much feed you're actually getting out of each paddock we just talked about. And if we've got all that, that's where we're starting to drought-proof our property as we move forward. I feel grazing charts are pretty important if you hadn't picked up on that. And from a consulting perspective, if I've got a client who's not getting the animal performance they'd expect or thought they could have been, or if they've got paddocks that aren't performing the way that they thought, if I look at a grazing chart, we can usually get some pretty good ideas on why they may not be getting the performance they thought within about 5 minutes, sometimes less. It's that important and that useful to be able to get that meaningful information. Without this type of information, what yields you're getting out of paddocks, when's it being grazed, how intense was the graze, what was the rest period between them, when did it rain, what was the correlation with that? without that information, we don't have meaningful information, so therefore we're relying on second-hand data. And let's not kid ourselves, we can get pretty subjective on how we remember things, and we forget stuff, and that's just the reality for all of us in every situation. So getting this data, pretty powerful. The other thing we can do then is we can start to look at our overall. So I've just looked at everything on a paddock level. So I've only been talking so far mainly in stock days per hectare and individual paddocks. We can now bring that up to a stock days per hectare per 100 mils, our SDH per 100, or if you're further south, your DSE days per hectare per 100 mils. And you can look at this across whatever time frame on your analytics dashboard. You can see the green line here is your stocking rate, and then your black line is your benchmark. Your blue line is the rolling rainfall, and you can just click on these in the program to turn on, toggle any of these ones on and off if you wanted to clean it up. And for example, if you want to turn off rainfall, or if you want to turn off the monthly rainfall bars here. So you can toggle that information out, but you can see how things have been tracking as we go back. And I'll give you an example of with Andrew and Megan. I remember logging into Maya and having a look at their business back here in about February 2015. And I could see that this graph was starting to go up like this back here. And that prompted a conversation. So, well, okay, so what's happening with this? What are you doing to manage the fact that your stocking rate is exceeding carrying capacity and trending up? And again, it's information that prompts a discussion. No one number means everything, but it's about supporting that decision-making process. You can see that stayed up there so that's the rainfall. January 2016, my apologies, the green line. So when it was starting to come up here, that prompted the conversation because the rainfall was really dropping out. Rolling rainfall got down to about 320 mils through this period here. You can see that the stocking rate was up over carrying capacity for a period of time there. And this year, it's been below for a period of time. Typically, that always happens. Whenever we go up over, we've got to come back down below and repay our debts from being in excess. It's usually the way that it works. So this is all historical. So you can get and you can show all your data. If you end up with 10 years worth of data here, you can see how you've been trending, what's happening to your actual capacity as you move through time. We can then put in our forecast. So we can actually do a grazing plan moving forward. Now there's two different types of grazing plans that you can do. You can do a grazing plan on an individual paddock about which paddocks you're going to allocate for which mob. And you can forecast that out in front. And if you've got different people in the business, they can just bring up on their phone and see when a mob was due to get moved to a new paddock. And if they decide that they need to go a day earlier or a week earlier, well, then they can record that, and that's all updated for you. So there's planning and forecasting at an individual paddock level, and then there's planning and forecasting at a whole of business or whole of cell level in terms of looking at what your forecast SDH per 100 is. So you can see here Andrew's got a forecast in there, had a crack at what rainfall he thinks he might get, and then looked at how many LSU he expects to run. And on that forecast, you can see that he's getting, on that rainfall there, he's getting back up to benchmark there in about February, March next year, which is comforting. I look at that and go, okay, I'm okay with that. It looks like the forecast of what they intend to do with stocking rate is not out of whack with what's possible. So that if that graph here was starting to really escalate and go through the roof over that benchmark back here in October, then we'd be needing to have a different conversation. Benefits from being able to do this: you can bring your operational team together. You can make more timely decisions, and that's what I love about this, is that we're not waiting to, oh, hang on, let's just update those livestock records, and when we update the livestock records, then we can redo our forecast. Everything's happening with a lot less data entry, and that's the bit that I feel is quite important. And when you get your head around this and start using it, you can make better decisions a bit faster. In terms of how do you enter the forecast data, you go into your planning tab. There's a planning tab up the top, and you can go in and either put a graze plan in, which is your individual grazers, Jess, or you can put in a overall forecast. And so I can bring that up to towards the end. Objective data for decision making. if you're talking about, if you're in a family situation and there's discussions around whether you can run the animals that you've got, you see situations where individual family members may feel as though they're overstocked, and other family members will be sitting there saying, well, if we just get an inch of rain, we'll be okay. I'm sure plenty of you can appreciate those conversations. This allows you to have a bit more objective data, which may, I'm not saying it will, remove some of the tension, allow you to be much more objective around the discussions that you're having. I've mentioned before, the external reviews are much easier for other people, such as us, and you determine who sees your data. It's not open slather to anyone. But I quite like being able to go and access this information. I feel as I can support people much better with it. And for different projects, anybody doing carbon trading, anybody who's maybe leasing country off somebody else, or you may be leasing your country to someone else, it's audit ready. You can see who's changing what, who's entering it. So it provides a lot of flexibility at that level there as well. The more recent releases of it, they're always releasing different versions of the software, and you don't have to do anything there. It just means next time you go and log in, the latest updates have been applied when you go onto the website and log into this information. One of the more recent ones has got the mapping capacity, so you can set your maps up, and you can see here there's some arrows to show what mobs have been moved to where, and you can do a lot of different views around the maps around intensity of graze, time since last, the average rest period that's been given to it. So there's a lot of other tools with it. Now, I'm only skimming over some of the features behind this. The reason for that is being quite deliberate with this as a program, in that I want to, as people using it, and some of you with different the projects we've got on the go at the moment, have got access to Maya as part of that project. I'd encourage you to get in and start using it. I feel as that gives you the potential to less data entry, less multiple entry points, and allows you to get a lot more meaningful information a lot quicker. And the reason for that is so that we can get stock flows and we can get grazing charts. And they're the high level things that I think are really important. If you do nothing else in this last little while, at least start recording what you're doing now. Just get your livestock information in there. And then your grazing chart will actually fall out of that. You don't have to do any more work on the back of it. So I hope that helps a bit. I think it's important to have that high level concept behind it. A couple of questions coming in there. If you've got any other questions, just put your hand up and we'll unmute you and you can have a bit of a chat. Or I'll, Nick and Bart, if you had anything else that you wanted to add, please jump in and do that.
Yeah, thanks, David. One of the questions just asked was about entering the forecast data that you're going through. And just for everyone's sake, you can go into the farm planning module and either create a new forecast or create a new grazing plan. And everyone's different situations are going to mean that will need a slightly different way of creating that. And if you need any help, please give me a call anytime.
Bit of an overview, and you can see you've got options across the top here. You've got your operations tab, farm planning tab, analytics, which is what I'm in now there, where you can see that SDH per 100 information. We can turn off the rainfall, turn that back on, and show and hide these different areas. So you can see there, you can hover over it and give you that data. You can look at that just for an individual area as well. You don't have to do it for everything. So you can see what's happened there for the last 1 year just for that paddock there. And then to do your farm planning stuff there, just you click on the farm plan. And you can see that they've currently got 3 grazing plans in place here at the moment with some of the mobs, the 3 main mobs that they've got. And then there's your forecast, and you can either create a new forecast from there or edit your forecast that's there at the moment. Or if you want to do a grazing plan, individual mobs and individual paddocks, you can create a plan from that point in time there. And then your farm ops is where you've got your that dashboard I was talking about. Your mob locations, you can see what moves are coming up, and if you want to go and enter a move, or edit it, view your grazing chart, that all comes up there. I won't do anything because it's a live business. Any other questions from anybody? Okay. Well, we'll leave it at that then. Thanks for your time this morning. If you've got any questions with regards to it, get hold of Nick, give him a call. he's the best person to as your first point of call around that. Or shoot him in. If you're working on this at night or early morning and you don't know how to do something, just shoot him an email, and Nick will have a look and he'll respond to you as soon as he can. Pretty good with his turnaround times there, and. Yeah, so and if you're not sure how to do something, how to enter a death or something like that, just shoot that email through or give him a call. If you're using it, it's important that you get to know. Lyndall, your question there, I think it's important. You've got a specific question there. I'll just follow up with Nick on that. It's a software program. I'd love to say they're infallible, but none of them are. There's still some little bugs that are being worked out, but I think that skeleton's working really well now. So, Nick or Bart, anything you wanted to add before we finish up?
Not from me. Thanks, David. You've covered it all pretty well.
Yep, thank you. No, look, I'd only say that we've got another release next week, which will have a bunch of improvements and some new functionality coming out, but I think you've covered it pretty well.
Very good. All right, well, thanks everyone. Have a really good Friday afternoon, and we'll be talking to you or see some of you soon. Cheers.